Okay, we should be up and running right now. So,
Okay.
well, here we are, everyone. It's Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, and everyone is hopefully remaining safe. There's a lot of conflict over whether or not you're going to be joining your families, and I'm gonna be by myself, but I'm gonna make some Thanksgiving and meals and take it to other people that I know who are going to be by themselves too. So, you know, and don't feel bad for me being by myself, because I kind of enjoy being by myself, believe it or not. Not that I'm a misanthrope or anything like that, but here we go. Just a few new people just joined in. I just want to see who it is.
It's me.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Yeah, and Dwight's on his way.
And
He's
Dwight Marsh.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't tell who's on Hastings 4's phone.
Oh, that's me, Jean Stinnett.
Oh, hi, Jean.
Pastor Jessica, I just joined. Pastor Jessica is my pastor from
Right.
UCC.
She told me she told me that some of you would be joining, and thank you for your interest, and we love having you. So
well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, there are a number of people here, and I won't go through all the introductions, but at some point we can, maybe if we log on early next time, we can all reintroduce ourselves. But I'm Dan Deffenbaugh, and most of us here are at First Presbyterian Church. However, there are some who were formerly at First Presbyterian who are now at different parts of the world. In fact, we've got Al Meyer,
Hi, Al.
Colorado. And then we have Joyce Orr, who's in Arizona. And right now, Lynn Friedewald is visiting in New York City. So we're all over the place today. Isn't that great?
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
I'm in Hastings.
Oh, you're back, Lynn. Welcome back. Hi.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Okay.
I know Lynn, I know Joyce. I have to tell you, I'm having to do this with my little baby iPhone, which means I can't see all of you on the screen, and I can't see anything in the chat. My iPad died.
Well, that's okay.
So I'm doing the best I can with this iPhone.
You can hear us, can't you?
I can see some of you and hear you.
Okay. Well, we'll get started. We have been studying the book of Revelation for quite some time. Actually, we did a 2-year pre-study on what's called the rise of the apocalyptic imagination.
Yeah.
Now we're at a point where we can get into the book of Revelation and study it with some historical background. I will ask everyone, as just a matter of our etiquette, to mute yourselves now so that we don't get a lot of feedback. And if you want to ask a question, you can unmute and just jump in like that. I appreciate that so much. Let me remind you where we were last time. Revelation is broken up into really 2 sections. And the first section, chapters 1 through 3, is that section where John is writing letters to the churches in Asia Minor, 7 churches, and he is actually serving as a mediator. Christ is Jesus, through John, is commenting on the role that many of the Christians in the churches are playing. And they are experiencing conflicts. Many Jews are kicking them out of their synagogues because they're claiming Jesus to be the Messiah. There's other conflicts of whether or not they should assimilate to the common Greco-Roman culture, you know, and a lot of the mystery religions that are associated with that. And Christ, through John, in writing these letters, is trying to encourage them to hold fast to what really is a very traditional Jewish understanding of who Jesus is. Jesus is the Messiah, but this particular book, Revelation, appears to be written by someone who is holding fast to very strong Jewish notions of what it means for Jesus to be Messiah, and thus what it means for Christians to be followers of Jesus. It's not clear that we could really even use the word Christian yet, because it's not being probably not being used at the time that this book is being written. Revelation being written around 100 of the Common Era, most likely during the reign of an emperor named Domitian. And it's falls in a genre called apocalyptic literature, and we've seen a lot of this already in our previous 2 years of study. And I just want to remind you of some of the visions that are foundational to the vision that we're going to read today. You might remember a long time ago, we looked at how certain prophets were called into their vocation. And the first of these was Isaiah. Isaiah, who was a priest during the time of King Ahaz and Hezekiah, around 720 BCE. And he has a vision in the temple. This is very important because that temple image is going to be replete in the book of Revelation when we read this text today. He has a vision in the temple. He sees God on the throne with seraphim, as they're referred to. Not really sure, seraphim aren't angels, but they are heavenly beings, each of those having 6 wings. And eventually one of them takes a hot coal and touches Isaiah's mouth and says, now you have been, you've been purified to go out and prophesy. A similar vision is going to take place about 100 years later when Ezekiel, and by this time, the Jews, the Israelites, have been exiled from Jerusalem, and they are living on the Kebar River and near present-day Baghdad, Iraq. And it's Ezekiel, who is a priest, much like Isaiah was, nostalgic for the temple, mourning for the loss of the temple, and he receives a vision, and it's one of the most spectacular visions in all of the Old Testament. You know, this fiery figure sitting on a throne, and then having these 4, they're referred to by Ezekiel as cherubim, not seraphim as in Isaiah, but heavenly beings. And these heavenly beings have, each of them has a face of a man, the face of a lion, a face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. And they appear to be riding these wheels that are turning and driven by the Spirit of God itself. Just a very, very almost psychedelic vision, but it's one that's foundational to the vision that we're going to read about today. Then we talked about Daniel. Daniel having similar apocalyptic visions. And then one that our authors don't talk about that I think is important to mention is the apocalyptic literature that we looked at, I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe last spring, called the Book of the Watchers, where there is, in each of these, the person who is having the vision is taken into the presence of God by an angel. And the angel explains to him what is happening. So with that in mind, we are going to read the beginning of the second part of the book of Revelation. The first part of the book of Revelation, chapters 1 through 3, talks about what is happening right now for John and the churches in Asia Minor. It's very, very focused on the present. But chapters 4 through 22, I believe it is, focus on what is about to happen. And this is where we get all of the overwhelmingly perplexing visions. But I hope by the end of the day, you'll begin to see just how important the vision that we're going to talk about has been for the worship and for the liturgy and for the theology of the church. This has been one of the great joys for me in coming back to this book of Revelation. And that has been, every time you read the Bible, from your particular station in life, it speaks to you in different ways. And this time, the focus on the theology of Revelation, and I've always discounted this text, as many of you know, Much like Martin Luther, I didn't think it really amounted to much. But it has been so influential in the theology of our history, and I hope to point that out today. But before I read, let me stop and see if there are any questions. I'm going to scroll down the line here. Just unmute and ask your questions. Okay. All right. Okay, wonderful. Doesn't look to be the case. This stained glass window is an image I pulled off of Google, but it's one that comes from the book of Revelation, but actually has its precedent in the book of Ezekiel. But try to keep this in mind as we read from chapter 4, as I'm going to read from chapter 4, because this has importance for our understanding of the Gospels. And I'll give you a little history of that. But first, let me read chapter 4. We started this last time, but it's always good to remind ourselves where we've been. After this, I looked, and there in heaven, a door stood open. Note here the parallelism between what we've just read in chapter 3, where Christ tells the church at Laodicea that he is setting a door before them, and he's knocking on the door, and it's up to them to open the door. Well, now a nice transition is taking place in a door that opens for John in heaven, and he's going to be asked to come through that door. After this, I looked, and there in heaven, a door stood open. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." And by the way, this verse, "come up here," is where many of the dispensationalists believe it's a reference to the rapture. It's quite a stretch out of this context to make that a reference to the rapture. The rapture doesn't occur, as you remember, in Revelation, but in Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians. But they will often refer to this text. John is called up into heaven, and this is a precursor to the rapture, supposedly. At once I was in the Spirit, and there in heaven stood a throne with one seated on the throne. And the one seated there looks like jasper and cornelian. And around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. Around the throne are 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones are 24 elders, dressed in white robes with golden crowns on their head. Let me stop right there and just remind you of the promises that Christ is making or has made to the churches in Asia, that those who persevere will be wearing white robes themselves and will be crowned as members of the kingdom of God. Coming from the throne are flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 burning, flaming torches. This is the reference back to that original vision that we've already established is the presence of the Spirit of God, the 7 spirits of God that has its parallel in the 7 lampstands in Zechariah and the menorah that is in the temple, the Jewish temple. There are 7 torches, which are the 7 spirits of God, and in front of the throne, there is something like a sea of glass, like crystal. Around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. This is where it starts to get a little bit nightmarish, right? The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with a face like a human face, and the fourth living creature like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and inside. Day and night without ceasing, they sing, "Holy, holy, holy, the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to the one who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, The 24 elders fall before the one who is seated on the throne and worship the one who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, singing, "You are worthy, our Lord God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." That's the whole of chapter 4. But what a foundational image. There's a lot to talk about here. I could spend about 3 or 4 more sessions just on this chapter. It's so dynamic. But I thought I would try to give you an introduction to the so-called, or what I'm calling, the architectonics of heavenly worship. On the right, you can see, those of you who have a screen big enough, is a folio from the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells was a Bible that was written in the 11th century in the British Isles, and was, as they say, illuminated. And here is this image of 4 creatures that John is viewing. Now later in his vision, later theologians are going to say that these 4 creatures have a specific reference to the Bible itself. And I'm hoping to move into that. But before we do, let's look at some numbers here. We know that John is very, very conscious about the numbers he uses. And this is a practice actually in the Jewish tradition known as gematria, where there are certain numbers that have kind of a sacred quality and others that do not. And the number 1, of course, representing the unity of God, the number 3, the number 7, the number 12, the number 40, all are used by John with a symbolic reference. Not only a very specific reference to the numbers, but sometimes John will refer to, let's say, the throne of God. This is something I'm making up. I'm trying to give you an example. The throne of God is only used 3 times, or Christ, the Son of God, is only used 7 times, right? There's nothing haphazard about the number of times a certain title is being used in the book of Revelation. It will either be 1, 3, 7, 12, 24, 40, or some multiple thereof, 14, 21, 28, that kind of thing. It's really amazing to, if you wanted to spend time doing this kind of mathematical analysis of Revelation, but people have done it. And John avoids certain numbers. The number 6, for example, is often used as a reference to Satan and to evil. So 6 is not ever used in reference to God. But perhaps the most important number here is the number 1. 1 representing wholeness, unity, indivisibleness, if I can use that term, and also a unity that cannot be described by a number. You will note that in this chapter that I just read, John is describing one who is on the throne, but he does not say that this is a human being. You don't see any human qualities about this person. There's nothing to suggest, a face. Now, later on, he's going to have a right hand and things like this. But there's an ineffable nature to God who is on the throne. You can only speak of him metaphorically or analogously. He has a look of jasper and carniolan, which I don't know what that actually is, but there's thunder and lightning and all of these things that are associated with this sublime being who's on the throne. And he's never identified or never described in as having a human form, so to speak. And this theologically will lend itself to what we call the ineffability of God, the unknowableness. God, who is, as Karl Barth said, the wholly other, completely removed from our comprehension, unable for us even to conceive. All we can do is somewhat inadequately describe or represent this God by references in nature, thunder, lightning, all of those kinds of things. But this God also has three aspects, and I want to talk about those. But before I do, I want to stop and see if anybody has a comment or something that they would like to add to this, or a feeling that you had or emotion upon hearing this text read or when you read it.
Dan?
Yeah.
Oh, the Book of Kells, I think there are some in this group who've been there, Trinity College in Dublin.
Yeah.
But say a little bit, could you just say a little bit more about the process? If it doesn't throw you off.
Oh no, the process of writing the book, you mean?
Yeah, how they made it and who made it. Just a line, just a sentence or two.
Well, yeah, boy. The Book of Kells, first of all, was an incredible work of art, and it was copied by scribes, monks living in monasteries along the coast, along the eastern coast, what we know in the British Isles. Lindisfarne is where they believe it was most likely written. But the inks that are used, and this illumination of the gospel was very important, because we're talking about this gospel would be taken out to the common people who could not read, but they could understand the stories by looking at the pictures. So often, these pictures would be shown to them. And the book itself was encased in a kind of a jeweled cover, which led itself to the kind of to the kind of awe that we were seeing right here with God on the throne. An interesting story about the Book of Kells is that sometime probably in the 11th century, when the Vikings were coming, from Norway, and the first places they went were the monasteries, and they tried to, pillage those structures. When they found the Book of Kells, they didn't care about the vellum, and they didn't care about the art or the text itself. They just ripped off the cover and then left the text behind, because it was worthless to them. But as a spiritual or symbol, it was foundational to the spirituality of the British Isles, what we might today call Celtic spirituality. And I'm actually going to come back to it a little bit when we talk about these four creatures. But some of you have seen the Book of Kells, no doubt. I was in Dublin, Ireland, at Trinity College with David McCarthy several years ago, and he and I had made an appointment, to see this book, and it wasn't that big. If you remember, we think it's this huge text, but it was just a small little text. We get into the museum, and just as we're, starting to, take a look at the book itself, the fire alarm goes off. Fire alarm goes off. Everybody had to evacuate. We only had an hour an appointment, so everybody goes outside. We could not get our hour was used up by standing in the snow in Dublin, Ireland, cursing ourselves, or cursing whoever pulled the fire alarm. But we never got back in to see it, because you have to make appointments for these things. And so there's always some disappointment that associated with the Book of Kells with me. But moving on
Thank you, Dan. Thank
yeah,
you.
sure. Moving on from the ineffable one, we have the three. And here we have this idea of what's known as the Tris Agion, a Greek word meaning three holies. Holy, holy, holy. meant by John to represent the superlative holiness of the one on the throne. Now, later theologians, of course, who are going to try to explain how it is that God can be Jesus and Jesus can be the Holy Spirit, and they're not three gods, but one God. They are going in what are known as the Trinitarian controversies of the 4th century. They're going to come to use this as a reference to this notion of the Trinity. You know, that John is hearing the praise of God in Trinity from these people, and they are people surrounding the throne. And I want to come back to that when we look at when we get through this whole slide right here, and we look at the hymn "Holy, Holy, Holy," because the hymn itself is a direct reference to chapter 4 in the book of Revelation. And now the four creatures that are represented here, that John sees around the throne. When Ezekiel saw them, he called them cherubim. Each of them had 6 wings, 2 for covering their face, 2 for covering their feet, and 2 to fly with. They didn't have eyes all over them, as John says they do here, but they each had 4 faces. Now, when John sees this image, he sees 4 creatures around the throne, but each of them has its own face. One has the face of a lion, the other has the face of a man, the third has the face of an ox, and the fourth has the face of an eagle. And their identity, their life is somehow connected to the throne itself, as well as to the seven lights, the candles around the throne itself. Candles that aren't burning with fire, but by some sort of supernatural fire itself. Later theologians, especially after Irenaeus, now remember at this time when John's writing, we don't have any gospels. Well, I guess what we should say, the gospels are in development at this time. And they're not just 4 canonical gospels. There are many gospels that are being written out there. Later on, around 175 of the Common Era, Irenaeus of Lyon, who was a church father, he would basically, by edict, declare that there should only be 4 gospels, because there are 4 directions, there are 4 winds, and also these 4 creatures that John witnesses on the throne, around the throne, Irenaeus and others came to see as representations or as prophetic visions of the 4 gospels that would yet to be decided upon. The first gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, and it's interesting, there's some disagreement on this. The Gospel of Matthew is seen as the man. The Gospel of Mark is the lion. The Gospel of Luke is the ox. And the Gospel of John is the eagle. In John's vision, in Revelation, a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, they don't all 4 have these faces. Each one of these has one of these faces, right? And they have eyes all over them. Kind of strange, but the eyes represent the all-seeing nature of these creatures, not of their own power, but of the power that comes through them in connection with the throne around which they gravitate or levitate. Now, there was some controversy or disagreement over whether or not the Gospel of Matthew should be referred to as the man, because Matthew, as we've seen in our forum class, is very, very Jewish in its interpretation. And the lion of Judah, that Jesus is often referred to as, should certainly represent the Gospel of Matthew. Well, St. Augustine saw it this way. And then Mark, who happens to reflect a Jesus that it has very strong human qualities, should be seen as the man. I happen to agree with that myself, but tradition, which comes from a church father named Jerome, has established that Matthew is the man, because it speaks to the human nature of Jesus, that Mark is the lion, because Jesus is often referred to as the Lion of Judah, son of David, you know, the Jewish Messiah in Mark. Luke is the ox, because Luke represents Jesus as a sacrificial victim. Very strong emphasis upon the sacrifice of the cross in the Gospel of Luke. And, you know, an ox was seen as the probably the most elaborate sacrifice you could make in the temple. It's, you know, a lot of meat there, right? And a lot of expense that goes into that. So here we have the sacrificial victim of Christ represented by Luke. Then, of course, you could probably figure out John if you know the Gospel of John, because the eagle flies in the heights that no other bird can, as does the theology of the Gospel of John. This is the high theology of where Christ is introduced as God himself in the very first chapter. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him. That's eagle-like theology. So later interpreters are going to see these four creatures in John's Gospel, also seen in Ezekiel's vision as precursors or prophetic images that would later come to fulfillment in the four Gospels themselves. Now, I know I can make some clarifications about that, so I'm going to stop and see if anybody would like to say anything. Once again, Anne, I'm perfectly lucid, right? Perfectly clear. Thank you. Okay, so this is why it was so important in the Book of Kells for these four events, because the Book of Kells it was basically the Gospels, and these four evangelists are seen on the front, bearing these images of John's vision. When we move on in the vision, we see the seven flames, the spirits of God. We've seen this already in the vision that he has in the first chapter. This appears to be a reference to Zechariah, who has a similar vision of the presence of God as seven candlesticks, or the menorah in the temple. And John holds on to this. The seven spirits of God represent the Holy Spirit for John. And then around that, you have these 24 elders, presbyteros in Greek. It's where we get our word presbyters, where we get our term Presbyterian. This is, you know, Presbyterians have always been dressed in white and worn golden crowns. So we all know that, right? So we have the 24 elders. 24 is 12 times 2, you know, 2 orders of 12. Now, what does that represent? Well, most commentators will suggest that this represents the 2 covenants, the 12 tribes of Israel and the new 12 tribes of the nations, represented by these holy figures who are human beings. They are not angels, dressed in white, wearing golden crowns, and then, as you will soon find out, worshiping God, falling on, you know, they are royal figures themselves, but falling on their faces and taking their crowns off and throwing them down before God, throwing them down on the glassy sea, so to speak. So I want to jump forward, if I can, and read to you the verses of the hymn Holy, 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 because it pretty much summarizes what we've just talked about. Holy, holy, holy. There's a trisagion, right? 3 holies, superlative holy. All the saints adore thee. casting down their golden crowns around the glassy sea. Cherubim and seraphim falling down before thee, who wert and art and evermore shall be. There's that eternal aspect of God that we've already seen in the first vision. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, all thy works shall praise thy name in earth and sky and sea. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. Every time I hear this hymn, or every time I read it or think about it, I can't help but think of our baccalaureate ceremony at Hastings College, right? With that wonderful descant in that last verse, the sopranos singing that high, such a beautiful representation, oral, one that is heard representation of this chapter 4 in the book of Revelation. And so I hope next time when we do hear that hymn, you will all have a better insight into what you're hearing. And, I don't mean that in a, pedantic kind of way. But noting, this book of Revelation that is often discounted, that's a crazy book that we shouldn't listen to. And no, that's not the case, because so much of our liturgy, so much of our understanding of how to worship God really has come from reflections on this 4th chapter of the book itself. So let me explain one more thing, and then I want to go back and talk about some of these images. Those of you who have a big enough screen, I'm showing a folio from another text from the 9th century. And this represents this chapter 4 of Revelation, chapter 4 and 5. Actually, here at the top, you see the Lamb holding in its leg the scroll. Now, the painter, Berengarius is his name, has very graciously not covered the Lamb or any of the creatures with eyes, right? But as we're going to find out, these creatures have eyes all over them. In fact, the 4 creatures aren't even represented. What's important to Berengarius in the 9th century are these 7 lamps, these 7 lights. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, surrounding the throne. Then, of course, the 24 elders casting down their crowns upon this area here called the glassy sea. This becomes all the more understandable when we know about the cosmology of the ancient Near East that probably held sway all the way up until, the 10th century. It's hard for us even to imagine this because it's just so inconceivable to us. But when we read the creation narrative in Genesis, I'm showing you here an image of what that creation narrative refers to. In the beginning, there's nothing but chaotic water. And God kind of creates in the middle of that water a bubble, so to speak. And it's within that little bubble that the earth and the moon and the stars and everything is going to be created. And so you can see here's the earth floating on the sea. This is how people conceived of the world in the time that John was writing. You see the sun, you see the moon, you see the stars, and then there's this kind of glass ceiling, which, as we have seen in our current election, has been broken many times, but there's this glass ceiling that holds the waters above from completely collapsing on the earth below. It keeps the bubble from bursting, so to speak. I want to stop there and see if you're all with me on this, because it's I know some of you don't have the screens that can help you to see this. But if you can imagine our earth, not a round bubble, but a flat expanse of land floating on water, held in place by some stone columns that go deep into the water below, and then a dome up above that, you know, when we look up there, we see the blue sky. And of course, we know that the blue sky is just the water on the other side of the glass ceiling, you might say. And that's referred to as the firmament. And so when God wants to, in the first century, God can open up windows and the rain can come down from the firmament. And God can withhold that rain when he wants to as well. Up above that firmament, you see in the sky, there's something called the gate of heaven. And this presumably is what John is referring to when he sees the door open up and God says, come up here, I want to talk to you. You know, I want to show you something. And it's in the heaven of heavens up above that John is going to behold God on the throne. The glassy sea that we're referring to here, you know, as these elders are throwing down their golden crowns, is that firmament that we're talking about, this kind of glass that's holding the waters back. Presumably, there must be some sort of glass between the upper firmament and the throne of heaven, though I don't know about that. But that was very important in this image from the 9th century. That glassy sea is central to it all, right? The waters themselves were understood to be chaos, out of which God is going to create order in the 6 days of creation. And God is the one who maintains that order. God on God's throne is the one keeping the chaos from overtaking the world. And it's the presence of God in that world, represented by these various lights that we're seeing, that is the order of creation itself. This is what John is seeing. I want to show you some other representations of this. This is from the 16th century. I can't remember if this is a fresco or not, but you see a little bit more detail in this image. Here, taking some liberty with chapter 7, you see God as the stereotypical bearded white man sitting on the throne. And we know, this is where sometimes art can imitate life. We read this back into chapter 4, excuse me. We didn't see any human representation sitting on the throne, but we tend to read that idea back into it, primarily because our art images suggest as much. But God is opening or holding out a scroll that the Lamb, who has 7 horns and seven eyes, is going to open. Around the throne, we see these 4 creatures. One of them, the lion. Oh, darn it. I got to watch myself here. One of them, the lion. The other, the ox. The other, the man. The other, the eagle. Each having 3 sets of wings, 3 pairs of wings. And thankfully, they have not represented the eyes all over them. But then the 24 elders around the throne, offering up their crowns to God, the glassy sea beneath, and here's John down below beholding all of it. And the fire around them, I think that's a borrowed image from the Book of Watchers, the fire all around them. Now, in our digital age, you can imagine that there are people with their digital software who've tried to recreate this, and it really loses a lot, but I thought I would show you one of them. This is what that representation looks like, and I'm sorry for those of you who have the small screens, but you see this orb, this emerald orb, and the one thing they did get right was this light at the center of the throne. The 4 creatures around the throne. Here you have the 7 lights here represented by a menorah, which is probably what John had in mind. the menorah that stands at the center of the temple, because all of this is very temple informed. When John this is called the throne room of God. When John is thinking about the throne room of God, he's thinking about the temple. And he's thinking about coming into the presence of the Holy of Holies. And, perhaps the four creatures are the cherubim upon which the throne of God stands, as we find in the Old Testament. But these very realistic elders, all, coming off of their thrones and throwing down their crown, and the lightning beneath. Pretty well done. I like the medieval stuff a lot better. But the hymn, Holy, 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 and of course the ones you probably know as well, crown him with many crowns. Another reference to this this chapter in the book of Revelation. I'll read it. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon the throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns all music but its own. Of him who died, awake my soul and sing, of him who died for thee, and hail him as our matchless King through all eternity. Crown him the Lord of heaven. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the one, ineffable one in three who created the world itself. Crown him the Lord of heaven, one with the Father known, one with the Spirit through him given. There's that Trinitarian reference that we've done. From yonder glorious throne, to thee be endless praise, for thou hast died for me. Be thou, O Lord, through endless days adored and magnified. Can't remember what my next slide is. Yeah, that is the end. So let me come back to a much more agreeable image. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions or comments that you would like to make. Get very enthusiastic and excited about this because in my mind, I'm making connections that I've never made before. And I love it. It's great.
I have one
Yes.
thing I guess I'd like to observe or ask. That phrase, you're casting crowns.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just always sort of heard that and been automatic about it, but hearing you talk about it and hearing your comments, that means that rulers, creatures who are really important are humbling themselves by taking off their crowns in front of God.
Right. Those who are presumed to be royal.
Yes.
Literally cast away their crowns in God's presence. There can't be any mistake about their humanity. And these are humans. They're not angels here. They're referred to as presbyteros, and their presbyters are never referred to as angels or vice versa in the Bible. So these are the royal. These aren't kings or queens on earth, but these are the faithful who have been made kings, who have received their white robes, who have received their crowns, but know fully well that it's through God's grace that has happened. And it's casting down, not just setting aside, but casting down as if this is, this golden crown is worthless in the face of God. So you're absolutely right, Anne. Anyone else want to say anything?
This is Jean. I just wanted to say, if it makes you feel any better, I have a little screen, but I can see your pictures.
Oh, good. Fantastic.
So don't worry about it. I just can't see your pictures and your faces at the same time, but I can see you.
Well, there are a couple others that have iPhones as well, Jean. So I'm thinking about them too. So
well, maybe if you have your iPhones, you guys, somebody told me this, scroll left or right on your screen and you can find the pictures.
Oh, wonderful.
That might help them too.
Oh, good. Al was going to say something.
Dan, I'm back to the four creatures who, we see the description and the tie back to the four Gospels in the New Testament. Their first reference is back in Ezekiel. Is there a Jewish tradition that shows what those four creatures symbolize to the Jews?
Oh boy, is there ever. Yes, but it is not. It's not commonly known, but there is a Jewish mystical tradition called Kabbalah, which means received mystical wisdom, and these are creatures that cannot be experienced in our day-to-day waking life, but can be experienced by those who rise to the mystical levels of coming into the presence of God. The whole mystical tradition, also found in Christianity, is one that through various spiritual disciplines like prayer, sometimes through extreme spiritual disciplines, maybe fasting. You might know of the Sufis, who hail from a Muslim tradition, but the same kind of mysticism. They whirl themselves, the whirling dervishes, whirl themselves into a kind of ecstatic sense of being, and the ecstatic experience.
Frenzy.
All of that is in order to come into the presence of this being who is at the center and the core of all creation. I could come back to the Kabbalah on this, or to the Zohar, which is the written text, which brings a lot of the oral tradition of Kabbalah into, it brings it to light from the 12th century. But these creatures are manifestations of the power of God, you might say. But does it play a role in common everyday Jewish worship? Probably not. But I'm sure there is just commentary upon commentary in the Mishnah and in the Talmud as to what these creatures are. And I don't possess the expertise to be able to comment on that. But it is not forgotten in the Jewish tradition, especially in the mysticism of the Jews. The image of Ezekiel, I should say, not the image of John, but you can tell that there's a connection between these, which raises the interesting question, right? Is this a kind of received tradition of what an image of coming before God is supposed to be like? And this is what John is drawing on, a perfectly human explanation. Or is this experience an experience that is actual, that is experienced by several different people and relayed back in roughly the same manner? A humanistic and a more spiritual interpretation would probably come to different conclusions on that. But I'll leave that to all of you to decide for yourself. Other questions, comments?
Dan, this is Sharon.
Hey, Sharon.
I think I remember a few years ago at a forum, there was a suggestion made by a presenter whose name I can't remember.
Oh, Sharon.
That
Sharon, you're breaking up on us. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that people's eyes actually sent out rays, as opposed to our understanding now that light comes into our eyes. Had you ever heard that and seen that as a part of this interpretation?
Not part of this interpretation, but that's interesting that you say that, because there is a tradition in world religions called the evil eye. You probably know about that, where you can be captivated by somebody's gaze or somebody's vision. And of course it has, I would say, reference to today in the 21st century, how people are subjected to the gaze. I mean, feminists talk about subjected to the male gaze a lot, but I don't know anything about the rays, but certainly the eyes were seen as very powerful instruments. They are the windows to the soul, of course. But here, most of the commentaries that I've read are suggesting that, the eyes represent this all-seeing nature, this consumptive knowledge that these creatures have. But you raise an intriguing question that I have not heard anything about. I'm sorry. Do you remember who the presenter was and what the forum was about?
No, it was about the Old Testament, and we were talking about concentric circles of Jewish faith and protection. Something was at the center and you didn't have access. And it was at the same time we were trying to get inside the thought of folks who lived in those times. And the fact the eyes were something that projected light more often than eyes that took in light. So
interesting.
That was the idea that was being played with.
I'm going to have to look into that. That raises all kinds of interesting questions. How about anyone else? Others? Lynn, you always sit back so nice and quiet. Oh, Jane's going to say something. You saying something? No, you have to unmute, Jane.
Okay.
Okay.
This is all so lyrical. And, we have a lot of church music. Was that true in the ancient world? Was any of this chanted like in the original in Hebrew and that sort of thing?
That's a great question. In the Hebrew, in fact, today in Hebrew worship, you have cantors, right? That that sing the text. They sing the Torah. That's how the Torah is supposed. The Torah is not supposed to be read. It's supposed to be heard, and it's supposed to be heard in a lyrical fashion. So the full force of the power and the emotion behind the text is given in the cantor's voice, which is the Spirit of God speaking through the cantor. This would have been heard as early as, the first temple. The Psalms themselves are, well, the reason we call them Psalms is they are songs. They are lyrically projected songs that are sung by the priest in the temple. So a lot of this, it is, again, this idea of praise. Remember the guys holding the crowns, and unfortunately in the images, they're all guys, they're all men. I think we've come a longer way than that for now, but they are also offering praise. They're burning incense and they're singing praise to God, which is a wonderful foundation for a theology of music in the church. And I can't think of a church in Hastings who has a more gratitude to give than First Presbyterian with that wonderful choir. And Will, I don't know when you guys are going to come back and start singing again, but hopefully when you do, imagine yourself as one of these guys in the white robes, wearing your golden crown, offering up praise to God on behalf of humanity. That's what's happening here. Wonderful, beautiful image. Anybody want to have the last word here? Our time is upon us, and I don't want to keep us any longer than we need to be.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Is there a Greek or Hebrew word for imagination? That is, the making of images. Do you know if they have that concept in Greek and Hebrew?
Well, the first thing, in terms of imagination, the Greek word for the image would be icon, E-I-K-O-N. So
okay,
that's where icon from. But for imagination, there's the word daemon. So where Damon Jensen Heitman gets his name. And the daemon is also where we get our word demon from, unfortunately, but it's not in Greek philosophy, it's not seen as the same way that we see a demon that possesses people. It's seen as an inspiring spirit that takes possession of somebody, a muse, so to speak. Can I ask why you ask, Dwight?
It ran across my mind something that went on earlier. I'm not sure quite why, but all of a sudden it made sense to me to inquire about it.
Yeah. I did not bring my Greek New Testament today, but it reminds me I should. I actually, it's out in my car. It's a terrible place for it to be, but I love questions about Greek because what a great language, you know, so dynamic. Well, folks, when we come back, we're going to stick with this image, but we're going to read chapter 5 of the text of the Bible, of the book of Revelation. And we're going to be introduced to the Lamb upon the throne. And from there, we'll continue to parse out this image and what it may have meant and what it may mean for us as well. Really enjoy the conversation today. Jean, you're welcome to join us always, and as well as other members of you know, the Congregational Church here in Hastings, Jessica included. So I will see you. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And so nice seeing you. And it's also nice at times to see that Jane Marsh can be muted.
Heard that?
Oh, darn, you heard that? I thought you guys already left.
Okay. Just you wait.
Could have come in handy 60 years ago, huh, Dwight?
And welcome back to Joyce. Welcome back to Joyce.
All right. Well, goodbye, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, bye.